The woman stumbled into Ezra's trading post, clutching a bundle wrapped in blood-stained cloth, her eyes wild with terror and something else, something that made his hand drift toward the colt on his hip. She pressed herself against the door as if the entire world was chasing her, chest heaving, dark hair matted with sweat and dirt. "Please," she whispered, voice cracking. "They can't find me here." Ezra Thornton had seen plenty of desperate souls pass through his remote outpost on the Colorado frontier. Outlaws, drifters, women fleeing violent husbands, but none had ever looked at him with such raw, pleading intensity. The bundle in her arms shifted slightly, and she clutched it tighter, a mother's instinct written in every line of her body. "Mom, you're bleeding." He gestured to the dark stains spreading across her torn dress. "It's not mine." Her voice was barely audible. "Most of it isn't mine." The wind outside picked up, rattling the windows of the small wooden structure that served as both store and home. Ezra had built this place 5 years ago, after Gettysburg left him with a permanent limp and a need for solitude. He sold supplies to travelers heading west, fixed what needed fixing, and asked no questions. It was a simple life until she arrived. "What's in the bundle?" he asked, though something in his gut already dreaded the answer. She shook her head frantically. "It's not what you think. I swear on my mother's grave, it's not what anyone thinks." Thunder rumbled in the distance. A storm was coming, and by the look of pure terror in her eyes, it wasn't the only thing approaching his doorstep. She glanced toward the window, then back at him, her knuckles white where she gripped the cloth. "They'll hang me if they find me," she said. "But if I tell you the truth, if I show you, you might do worse." Ezra studied her face in the lamplight. Young, maybe 25, with the kind of beauty that could start wars or end them. But it was her eyes that held him, not just afraid, but carrying a weight that seemed too heavy for any one person to bear. "Who's looking for you?" "Everyone." She sank against the door, exhaustion finally overtaking fear. The whole territory by now. The bundle moved again, more deliberately this time, and a soft sound escaped from within the cloth. Not quite human, not quite animal, something that made the hair on Ezra's neck stand up. "Mom," he said slowly, "what exactly are you carrying?" She looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing his soul against some invisible scale. Then, with trembling hands, she began to unwrap the bundle. The blood-stained cloth fell away layer by layer, and Ezra felt his world tilt on its axis. It was a baby, but not entirely. The child, if it could be called that, had human features, but its skin held an otherworldly pale luminescence, and when it opened its eyes, they reflected the lamplight like a cat's. Small, delicate, but unmistakably different. As Ezra stared, the baby's tiny fingers moved, revealing what looked like translucent webbing between them. "My God," he whispered. "I found him by the river 3 days ago," she said, wrapping the cloth back around the infant. "Left to die. His mother," she swallowed hard. "She was one of the spirits that live in the deep pools. The Ute told stories about them, but I never believed until I saw her body on the shore." Ezra's rational mind rejected what he was seeing, but his eyes couldn't deny the evidence. The child was breathing, watching, unmistakably alive, and unmistakably not entirely human. "His father was a trapper named McKinnon," she continued. "When the townspeople found out what he'd done, what he'd created, they burned him alive. Now they're hunting the child. They think he's cursed, an abomination. Are you his?" "No." Her voice was firm. "I'm Sarah Whitmore. I was the school teacher in Copper Ridge until 3 days ago. I saw them coming for him, with torches and rope, and I couldn't let them murder a baby, no matter what he is." The wind outside grew stronger, and with it came the distant sound of hoofbeats. Sarah's face went white. "They've found me." Ezra moved to the window and peered through the rain-streaked glass. Torches flickered in the darkness, at least a dozen riders approaching fast. He recognized the lead horse, Sheriff Dawson, a good man under normal circumstances, but these weren't normal circumstances. "There's a root cellar," Ezra said quickly, "behind the store counter. You can hide there." Sarah shook her head. "They'll tear this place apart looking for us. I won't make you complicit in this. You already have." The words surprised him with their certainty. "That baby, whatever he is, doesn't deserve to die for existing." The hoofbeats grew louder. Through the rain, Ezra could hear voices shouting over the storm. Sarah clutched the child closer, her decision clear in her eyes. "If they find us here, they'll hang you too," she whispered. Ezra looked at the baby one more time. Those strange luminous eyes seemed to hold an ancient sadness, as if the child understood exactly what his existence meant for everyone around him. In that moment, Ezra made a choice that would define the rest of his life. "Then we better make sure they don't find you." The pounding on his door came like thunder, violent and demanding. Ezra had barely gotten Sarah and the child hidden in the root cellar when Sheriff Dawson's voice boomed through the storm. "Ezra, open up. We know she's in there." Ezra limped to the door, his old war wound aching in the damp weather. He took a deep breath, steadying himself for the performance of his life, and pulled it open. Dawson stood there with 11 other men, all armed, all soaked to the bone but burning with righteous fury. "Evening, Sheriff," Ezra said calmly. "Hell of a storm. Cut the pleasantries, Thornton. Where is she? Where's who?" Dawson pushed past him into the trading post, his eyes scanning every corner. The other men followed, spreading through the small space like locusts. Ezra watched them tear through his carefully organized supplies, overturning crates and barrels with reckless abandon. "Sarah Whitmore," Dawson said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "The witch who stole that thing. Don't know any Sarah Whitmore." Ezra kept his voice level, even as his heart hammered against his ribs. "What thing? Don't play stupid with us." This from Tom Bradley, a rancher whose face was twisted with disgust. "She's got the demon child with her. McKinnon's spawn. We tracked her prints right to your door." Ezra glanced toward the window, where rain was washing away any evidence of footprints. "Lot of people pass through here, Tom. Can't say I remember everyone." Dawson grabbed Ezra by the shirt, pulling him close. "Listen to me, old man. That creature isn't natural. It's an abomination against God, and anyone who helps it is damned along with it." "Creature?" Ezra met the sheriff's eyes steadily. "We talking about a baby here, Sheriff." "That's no baby," Bradley spat. "It's got webbed fingers and eyes like a demon. McKinnon laid with something unholy, and this is the result." Two of the men had found the counter and were moving it aside, revealing the hidden entrance to the root cellar. Ezra's blood turned to ice water. "They had seconds, maybe less. Found something," one of them shouted. But as they lifted the trap door, the baby began to cry. Not a normal infant's wail, but something haunting and beautiful, like a song that belonged to another world entirely. The sound froze every man in the room. Dawson's face went pale. "Sweet Jesus, it's true." The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by an unnatural silence that seemed to press against them from all sides. In that moment, Ezra saw something shift in the men's faces, not just fear, but a kind of primal terror that went deeper than rational thought. "It's calling to its own kind," Bradley whispered, "summoning more demons." Through the open door, lightning split the sky, illuminating the darkness beyond, and in that brief electric moment, Ezra could have sworn he saw shapes moving in the rain, tall, graceful figures that seemed to glide rather than walk, approaching from the direction of the river. The sheriff's hand moved to his gun. "Everyone out now. We burn this place to the ground." "Wait." The voice came from the root cellar, soft but clear. Sarah emerged slowly, the bundled child in her arms, her eyes meeting each man's gaze without flinching. "You want us? Here we are." The men raised their weapons, but something in her bearing, a quiet dignity that cut through their fear, made them hesitate. She stepped into the lamplight, and Ezra saw what he'd missed before. Exhaustion that went bone deep, but also an unshakable resolve. "You're right," she said to Dawson. "He's different, but look at him. Really look." She pulled back the cloth, revealing the baby's face. In the warm glow of the oil lamp, the child's unusual features seemed less otherworldly, more simply unique. The luminescence in his skin was subtle, almost like moonlight on water, and his eyes held not malevolence, but the innocent curiosity of any newborn. "This is what you're afraid of." Sarah's voice was steady, but tears traced lines down her dirt-stained cheeks. "A baby who lost his mother, a child who never asked to be born." Tom Bradley's gun wavered. "It's not natural, Sarah. You know that." Neither was my brother William, she replied quietly. Born with one arm shorter than the other, fingers fused together. The doctor said he'd never amount to anything, but he became the finest carpenter in 3 counties. She looked around the room. How many of you knew William Whitmore? How many trusted him to build your homes, your barns? Several men shifted uncomfortably. Ezra saw recognition in their faces, and shame. That's different, Dawson said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Sarah stepped closer to the sheriff. Or are you just afraid of what you don't understand? The baby made a soft sound, not quite a coo, not quite a song. One of his tiny hands escaped the blanket, those translucent fingers moving in what could have been a gesture of greeting. Without thinking, Ezra reached out and let the child grasp his weathered index finger. The contact sent a shock through him, not electric, but warm, like sunlight breaking through clouds. For just a moment, he felt something that defied explanation, a sense of perfect peace, as if all the world's troubles had lifted from his shoulders. Jesus, he whispered, staring at the baby in wonder. Several of the men saw the exchange, and their expressions began to shift. The rigid fear in their faces gave way to something more complex: confusion, curiosity, even a grudging recognition of the child's humanity. Outside, the storm was beginning to pass. Through the window, Ezra could see the mysterious figures he'd glimpsed earlier, but they weren't approaching anymore. They stood at the edge of his property like sentinels waiting. His mother's people, Sarah said, following his gaze. They're not demons, they're just different, ancient. They've been watching over the rivers and streams long before we came west. The baby's grip tightened on Ezra's finger, and in that simple gesture, he felt the weight of choice settling on all their shoulders. Sheriff Dawson holstered his gun first. The simple act seemed to break a spell that had held them all captive, and one by one the other men lowered their weapons. The baby gazed up at them with those luminous eyes, and Ezra realized that what he'd mistaken for otherworldly menace was simply innocence, pure and untainted by the fear of grown men. We can't just let this go, Tom Bradley said, but his voice held uncertainty now instead of rage. No, Dawson agreed, we can't. He looked at Sarah, then at the child. But we can't murder a baby either, no matter what his parentage. Through the window, the watching figures began to move closer. Ezra could see them more clearly now, tall, graceful beings with the same luminescent skin as the baby, their movements fluid as water. They weren't threatening, they were mourning. One of them, a female, had tears streaming down her face that caught the moonlight like scattered diamonds. They're grieving, Sarah whispered, for his mother, for McKinnon, for what this child will face in a world that sees him as a monster. The female figure approached the door, stopping just at the threshold. When she spoke, her voice was like wind through reeds, speaking words in a language none of them recognized, but all somehow understood. He is the bridge between our worlds, her voice seemed to say. He will need both to survive. Dawson stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun but not drawing it. What are you asking? The being's gaze moved from the sheriff to Sarah to Ezra, finally settling on the baby. Let him choose, when he is old enough, river or land, our way or yours, but let him live to make that choice. And if we say no? Bradley asked. The being smiled, and in that expression was both infinite sadness and infinite patience. Then you will have chosen for him, and for yourselves. The implication hung in the air like morning mist. These creatures could defend themselves if they needed to, but they wouldn't force the issue. They were offering a covenant, trust for trust, life for life. Ezra looked around the room at the faces of men he'd known for years. He could see the moment when their fear transformed into something deeper, understanding. The baby wasn't a threat to their world, he was a chance to make it bigger. He stays with me, Sarah said suddenly. I'll raise him, teach him about both worlds. Sarah, Dawson began. No, her voice was firm. I took responsibility for him 3 days ago. I'm not backing down now. The water being nodded slowly, then placed something on the threshold, a small pendant made of river stones and silver, strung on a cord of braided grass. For when he is ready to learn, she said.
As dawn broke over the mountains, the water people faded like mist, leaving only the pendant as proof they'd ever been there. The men filed out of Ezra's trading post in silence, their purpose transformed from vengeance to something like pilgrimage. Dawson paused at the door. "Sarah, if you need anything, supplies, protection, I know where to find you, Sheriff." After they'd gone, Ezra looked at Sarah and the baby, who had finally fallen asleep in her arms. "You can stay here as long as you need," he said. "Both of you." She smiled for the first time since she'd stumbled through his door. "Thank you for everything." Years later, when travelers would ask about the strange lights they sometimes saw dancing over the river, or the young man who could speak to water itself, Ezra would simply smile and say that some stories were too big for words. But he would remember this night, the night when fear became wonder, when a baby's grip on his finger had changed the world. The child grew strong and wise, walking easily between two worlds, and the territory prospered under his quiet guardianship. And sometimes on nights when the moon was full, you could see him standing by the river, speaking in two languages to friends in both worlds, the pendant around his neck catching starlight like captured dreams.